Have you ever, really stopped to think about money? I mean, what is it? Not just the paper or the screen numbers, but fundamentally. And why does its value seem to shift around so much? It affects your groceries, your savings, everything, really. Today, we're doing a deep dive into its history. It's quite a ride. We're tracing how money evolved, from being pretty stable way back when to, well, the volatility we often see now. And we'll look at the search for stability again. We're pulling a lot from a really interesting analysis by Swan Bitcoin on YouTube. It's called From Gold to Bitcoin, A Short History of Money.
Yeah, and what's so important here, I think, is that this whole idea of money stability or,
Right.
the lack of it, it's not just some abstract economic thing. It's deeply personal, right? This isn't just a history lesson. It's
Yeah.
about understanding the forces shaping our economic lives. It really makes you ask what happens when the foundation of, well, everything commerce-related starts shifting.
Exactly. So our mission today is to unpack that journey, pinpoint those key moments, those turning points, and crucially, connect it all back to your world right now, especially as we're all trying to figure out these changes in currency and, you know, financial uncertainty. Okay, so to get where we are, let's rewind, way back to what the source kind of calls the good old days of money. For literally thousands of years, money was mostly gold or silver. Simple, right? It was something you could touch, it was rare, and everyone basically agreed it had value. Under the gold standard, a country's money was directly tied to a set amount of gold. You could, theoretically, swap your paper for actual gold. This naturally limited how much money could be created. Can you even imagine that now? A world where your money's value was understood, trusted, not just because the government said so, but because of the metal itself.
And that scarcity is the absolute key point. Gold and silver being rare acted as a natural brake on the money supply. Now, the source does mention things like sneaky inflation, kings shading bits off coins, stuff like trade. But the core trust held because the physical supply was limited. So when paper money came along later, it had to be linked to that metal, that promise that you could convert it back. That was the bedrock of trust for, well, ages. It stopped governments just printing money whenever they felt like it.
Okay, right. But here's where it starts to get really interesting and leads us more towards today's system. Fast forward to the 1930s. Global chaos, right? The Great Depression, unemployment was through the roof, economies were collapsing, people were really suffering, the old ways weren't working, something drastic was needed. And that's when John Maynard Keynes enters the picture, a Cambridge economics professor with some pretty revolutionary ideas.
Yeah, Keynes' big idea, basically, was that markets couldn't always fix themselves quickly during a really bad downturn. He argued for governments to step in, actively, by spending more, managing the money supply. Fiscal and monetary policy governments could boost demand, create jobs, pull the economy out of a slump. The idea was that government spending would multiply through the economy. You can imagine how appealing that must have sounded to governments facing disaster, right? The power to actively stimulate, to ease suffering. As the source notes, governments kind of liked that idea of flexibility. It gave them tools the rigid gold standard just didn't offer. It's a major shift from money backed by stuff to money managed by policy.
So the groundwork was laid for a massive change, and that really hit in 1971. President Nixon. Big pressures, Vietnam War costs, inflation at home. His solution, he completely cut the U.S. dollar's final link to gold. Before that, other currencies were pegged to the dollar, and the dollar is pegged to gold. Nixon snipped that thread. This fundamentally changed the game. It meant the U.S. government could essentially print dollars as needed without needing gold reserves to back it up.
And the immediate fallout from that is, it's incredibly significant. The source flat out states this decision threw the world economy into a massive inflation cycle. And, looking back at the price rises afterwards, it's tough to disagree. It completely decoupled money from a scarce physical asset. Central banks suddenly had way more power over the money supply. This is the full switch to fiat currency money that has value because the government says so, and because we all collectively trust it. It's a shift from trusting metal to trusting institutions. Think of it like the analogy the source uses. Imagine your favorite juice on the gold standard. The amount of actual juice was fixed. Want more drink? You need more juice. Simple, but off the gold standard. It's like the government got a water tap hooked up to the juice pitcher. They can add as much water as they want. Makes the juice go further, sure, but it definitely dilutes the flavor, the potency. That's basically monetary inflation. More money chasing the same amount of goods means each dollar buys less. Its purchasing power gets watered down.
Right, dilution. So, what does that actually mean for you listening right now? The source makes a really strong point here. It argues that every time more money is created without a real increase in economic output, it automatically lowers the value of all the money already out there. And by diluting the currency like that, it's essentially stealing our time, energy, and talent. That's the phrase they use. Because, you have to work more hours, use more energy just to earn enough of these weaker dollars to buy what you need to stay financially stable. Your wages might look the same, but they buy less. And this wasn't just Nixon. The source points out it's been a trend, suggesting every president since for right through to Biden has continued expanding the money supply, with the source suggesting recent times have taken it to a whole new level.
That's a very pointed claim. And it highlights a core tension in fiat systems, doesn't it? The argument is straightforward. Your nominal wage stays the same, maybe even goes up a bit. But if the money itself is worth less, your real ability to buy things goes down. And that's not abstract. Think about saving for your kid's college or a house deposit. You put money away, work hard for it, and years later, inflation has eaten away a big chunk of its value. That's the personal cost this source is getting at. Your hard work, your time, it's effectively devalued. You run faster just to stay in the same place economically.
And it's not just a U.S. story, is it? The source paints a pretty bleak picture for places like Venezuela, Zimbabwe, Lebanon, Turkey, Argentina, the list goes on, Sudan, Syria, Iran, Ethiopia, too. These countries are dealing with hyperinflation, which is just terrifying, often defined as prices rising over 50% per month. The source argues this nightmare happens because the governments lack the discipline to limit their money supplies. It just destroys stability, destroys trust in the currency. Imagine getting paid and rushing to spend it because you know it'll be worth much less by tomorrow. That's reality for millions.
Absolutely. Hyperinflation is the extreme endgame failure, and it's devastating. But, while the source rightly highlights those massive risks of just printing money endlessly, it's probably fair to consider the other side of the coin, too. A more, maybe nuanced or even contrarian take on this flexibility idea. Governments and central banks often argue that being able to manage the money supply without being tied to gold gives them vital tools they need for today's complex economies. This flexibility lets them fight recessions with stimulus, manage national debt, fund public services, build infrastructure, things a super rigid gold system might make really difficult or even impossible.
So you're saying there's an argument that maybe some inflation, or at least the potential for it that comes with flexibility, is seen as a necessary price to pay, a trade-off for being able to manage the economy.
Precisely. It raises that question, doesn't it? Is a certain amount of inflation an acceptable trade-off for being able to soften economic blows, maybe prevent depressions like the 1930s, keep people employed during a crisis? Think about the 2008 crash or the pandemic response recently. Many argue that the aggressive money creation, while definitely inflationary, stopped things from getting much worse, like a total collapse. Fiat lets credit flow more easily, which can fuel growth and innovation. Governments can fund big projects, respond to emergencies. So this view suggests that, yeah, the risks of dilution are real, very real, but maybe the tools you get with fiat are just indispensable now, that the alternative, total rigidity, might cause different kinds of severe economic pain. It really boils down to weighing that desire for absolute stability against needing room to maneuver in a really dynamic, often unpredictable global economy.
Hmm. That definitely adds another important layer to think about. Okay, so given all these challenges, these debates, where do we head next? The source admits, quite fairly, we don't have a crystal ball. No one does. But it does float the idea that history might sort of rhyme, that we might naturally drift back towards a stable money system, kind of like how the world settled on gold thousands of years ago. And the modern contender proposed by the source, well, it's something you've definitely heard of, Bitcoin, often called digital gold.
And what's really striking there, from the source's perspective, is why it's compared to gold. It comes back to that core idea, scarcity. But programmed scarcity this time. Unlike fiat money, which can theoretically be created endlessly, Bitcoin has a strict limit coded right into it. Only 21 million coins will ever exist, period. Plus, there's this halving event that happens roughly every 4 years, cutting the rate of new Bitcoin creation. It's a deliberate attempt to bring back that hard supply cap, but in a digital format. Theoretically, this makes it resistant to that dilution problem we talked about, the kind that happens when central banks just decide to print more money. You could use that anchor metaphor again, maybe. For ages, gold was like a reliable anchor for the economic ship in stormy seas, a steady reference point. When that anchor got pulled up in 71, the ship could move more freely, maybe faster sometimes, maybe avoid some rocks, but could also drift way off course, right? Bitcoin, in this view, is like trying to drop a new anchor, a digital one this time, in this huge digital ocean. trying to bring back that predictable stability that a limited supply offers.
Of course, Bitcoin has its own whole set of discussions around it too, doesn't it? Volatility, how many transactions it can handle, energy use, regulation, that's all part of the ongoing story.
Wow, what a journey we've covered from the solid feel of ancient gold through the massive shifts of the 20th century, Keynes' ideas, the Nixon shock, and now looking at something like Bitcoin, you've really just had a deep dive into the absolute core of our financial world, understanding where inflation comes from, the arguments for flexibility, and this ongoing human quest for something, reliable to store value in.
Yeah, and hopefully this dive encourages you to think critically about what you value most in money. Is it that rock-solid stability, even if it means less flexibility for governments? Or is adaptability more important, the ability to respond to crises, even if it means accepting the risk of your money losing value over time? These aren't easy questions, and the answers affect everything. Global politics, national policy, right down to your own personal finances and how you plan for the future. It's definitely a conversation that's going to continue.
Absolutely. It sparks some really deep thoughts, I think, about how money actually works and why it impacts us all so profoundly. We genuinely enjoy putting together these deep dives, trying to bring you the key insights you need. If you found this valuable, please do consider following, liking, maybe sharing it with someone else who likes to dig into these topics. And you can follow What Bitcoin Taught Me for more insights like this on Twitter X, Nostr, Bluesky, Threads, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Thanks so much for joining us for another deep dive.